Okay. Well, good evening. My name again is Val Walters. I'm the Executive Director of the Ryan Bartel Foundation. Happy to have you all join us here for one of our monthly parent panels where we provide resources to parents on important topics. This month we are talking about how to be an ally. The Ryan Bartel Foundation is a youth suicide prevention foundation, and some folks ask, well, why are you interested in Pride? Or why are you interested in LGBTQ plus issues? And I will say, to save kids' lives. The number of LGBTQ plus community members in their teens who are more likely to die by suicide or do self-harm is much higher than those that are not in the community. So we do want to ensure that we have allies who are not just looking out for their own kids, but their kids' friends. So that is why the issue is important to the foundation. We provide resilience building programs for teens as well and support groups. So please check out our website for information to see if there are any of our programs are relevant to the kids in your life. So without further ado, I am going to turn over the duties to Denisha Hamilton, who not only is a RBF board member, but also heads up our mental health advisory board. So Denisha.
Thank you, Val. So as Val mentioned, my name is Denisha Hamilton, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. I own a private practice here in Loudoun County and expanding into Alexandria. And my focus is on working with teens and working with young adults. So I work with kids in the LGBTQ plus population and their families regularly, which is why I'm really excited about our panel tonight and this discussion. So I'm going to have everyone just introduce themselves real quick, and then we will get into our talk. So I'm going to go straight across my screen. So Chris, you are next.
Good evening. My name is Chris Candace Tuck, and I'm the president of Equality Loudoun.
Thank you, Chris. Jordan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jordan Costin Sumter. I am the founder and executive director of Safe Space Nova. I am also a pre-licensed therapist.
Thank you, Jordan. And Fox.
Hello, I am Fox. I go by Fox or Mr. Fox. I'm a mental health educator, advocate, and coach with a background in intensive and home family therapy.
Thank you. So I'm going to read a really quick little statistic that brings all of this home, and then we're going to get into our talk. So young people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community are more likely to experience challenges with their mental health due to the discrimination and oppression they might be facing at home, at school, on sports teams, or even within their own friend groups. In a study by the Trevor Project, 2 out of 3 teens reported that someone had tried to convince them to change their sexual orientation. As our world becomes more accepting of broader and more diverse identities, it is not uncommon for people to have questions about how to better support the LGBTQIA plus community. So my first question to get us started today is, what is an ally? And I'm Fox, since you went last with the introductions, I'm going to have you get us started tonight.
Happy to. So I'd like to point out that first and foremost, ally is a verb. It is not a noun. Ally is something, it requires action. It's not just, I am an ally. So an ally, and this usually applies to the term in general, an ally is someone who is a safe person, a friend, a companion, someone who can be trusted. When we're talking about the LGBTQIA2S community, we're talking about people who actively create safe space for queer individuals, for LGBTQIA plus people, teens, etc., to be themselves without having to hide, without having to stay in the closet, without having to pretend who we are. And so being an ally is being a person that shows compassion and kindness and openness.
I love that idea, and I want to expand on that just a little bit further. When we hear the word ally for our heterosexual partners, they find that word sometimes to be so intimidating because it's had so many definitions and a resurgence in the last couple of years, especially as it relates to the LGBTQ community. What I like to do is try to distill it down as best I can to something that's more familiar. So And while this is tragic, when you have a family member who's diagnosed with cancer, for example, generally, if that's somebody that's close to you, you're doing everything you can if you don't have the information to bone up on it, right? So that looks like, what can I do to prolong the life of this person? Can I read articles, whether online or in print? Are there people I can talk to? Are there stories that I can listen to? That's one way it becomes so familiar to you, or that individual who's going through that experience with that family member or that close friend. So they become familiar and find out what are the best way they can support somebody so that they can have a more meaningful situation, is one that's not as difficult when it comes to experiencing cancer. So that's one way I like to relate that to people is what have you taken in to better understand the experience of somebody who's part of the community? That's a good place to really start when it comes to talking about being an ally.
And I'll add to what Jordan said. So often one of the things that I encounter are folks who think that ally just means I don't want to harm you. I will tolerate you. That is not allyship. That is so far away from the idea. As Fox said, it is a verb. And so if there's a very large gap between tolerance, acceptance, and celebration, and you've really got to move through those steps. Tolerance is not enough. It is not. And for a lot of folks, tolerance really looks like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know about your identity. I don't want to know about the culture that comes with you. And so if I don't know, I will accept you, or I will allow you into my spaces. That is not allyship. Allyship is intentional. It is forward thinking, and it is making that place where people know they're going to be more than just allowed. They will be celebrated for who they are.
So first, let me just say, I love everything the three of you just said. So you are getting us started right on an awesome, awesome foot. I love the idea that allyship is a verb and it requires action, not just, like Chris said, not just being tolerant. So if let's say I want to be an ally, but I don't know how to be, how do I support my child? How do I become an ally? How do I get informed?
You know, I love this question because today, and one role I've recently taken on is as a co-facilitator of a parent group that supports parents whose youth have come out to them as part of the LGBTQ community. That's a resource that's available now in so many different forms. There are virtual groups, there are in-person groups. So seeking out those resources is so important that are now available. There are organizations whose whole purpose and intentional focus is on those parents who are, hey, I'm caught up in the headlights here. My child came out. I want to support them. I don't know how. So seeking out those resources is so important, and something I encourage all parents who come to our organization and others that I know of who say, I'm new to this. I want that assistance. Can you help me?
One of the things I like to advise folks is don't put the burden on the queer person themselves. It's not your child's job to explain themselves or their friends. There are resources. You can Google it. Organizations like mine spend hours, hundreds of man hours a year building out websites with definitions, places that you can go, videos, things that you can explore different topics more in depth, as opposed to trying to get the people around you to put that burden on them to explain themselves. This stuff's out there. And if we want to be good allies, like I said, we've got to be forward thinking and find that information ourselves.
Beyond just places where we can get resources, there are ways that we can learn that are very much related to what we're going through. Peer support groups are a great way to hear what other parents are experiencing. They're usually led by a professional who's going to make sure that you don't get some wrong information. But it's a space where not only will you be able to get information about what is common to expect, what is totally normal, what are the things that are guaranteed to happen that you wouldn't even think about. Chances are another parent has already gone through them and they may be able to help you through that. So it's not just a chance to learn, it's a chance to get that support as well. And there are tons of parent support groups through the various resources that are both available nationally and locally in Virginia.
So I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but I like to ask all the questions that no one else likes to ask. So I'm just going to throw one of those lovely bombs out now. So what if I'm the parent that this is really outside of my comfort zone? I don't want a gay kid. I don't want a trans kid. Don't want to know about it. Don't want to be a part of the community. I'm not ready. How do I what would you all say to me as the parent? Because while I don't want any harm to come to my child, I also am not ready to step out of my comfort zone.
So I can say as a parent of two queer, young children, they're 8 and 10. There's a lot of times we look at our kids and we don't want to do things because we're not ready. But that's exactly what parenting is. I'm not ready for my kid to get a driver's license. I'm not ready for my daughter to start middle school. I'm going to learn everything I have to learn to support them. And so even if I'm uncomfortable, we have to push ourselves outside of that, because this is not, it's not hyperbole. It's not hypothetical. These kids exist. They're going to exist and identify how they identify, regardless of whether we support them or not. And the faults, what happens, the results of not being there to support them, they are catastrophic. They are life and death for some of these kids. And so if we say to ourselves, I am uncomfortable and I'm going to let my discomfort keep me from supporting my child, what often results is that we have a really bad relationship, parent-child relationship that can be really strained. You can strain your child's mental health. They can develop anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. It's not a hypothetical to say that being uncomfortable and allowing that to dictate how you're going to relate to your child is going to make a huge difference in how their life will go forward.
I often want to question the discomfort in the terms of the parents. So we understand that we're a multitude of cultures, different socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnical backgrounds, the list kind of goes on. So there's reasons and conditioning that tend to go into these types of feelings and behaviors of an individual. So my challenge to parents when I meet them is not to Chris's point, sit in the discomfort, but more or less try to figure out why the discomfort exists. Along with that, also explaining that this is a process. This is a process for most people to want to talk to you about what their sexual orientation is. It is no different for you as an individual who did not have an expectation or a thought, quite frankly, a lot of times that you would end up with a child who identifies as LGBTQ. So for a lot of parents, it is a process to get to a point of respect, understanding, and acceptance. That's a process that we can work on together if one is open to it. And the most important part is, as long as you're open, we can continue to move forward. Is there going to be discomfort? Yes. Do we sit in the discomfort? Ideally, the situation is no, because we want to make sure that your child is going to be in the best place possible and feel supported by you, so they don't end up in those situations which are increased anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation.
I'd like to go back to whether or not someone is ready. How many parents weren't ready to be parents? How many parents weren't ready for their kids to go to school, for their kids to start puberty, for their first time the kids were embarrassed by them? We're not ready for most stuff, and that's how we get through it. Most things that are worth it are not usually easy. And I mean, if parenting is one of them, then, well, I don't know, I'd have less job security. Parenting isn't supposed to be easy. When it's easy, it means everything is either ideal or something is terribly wrong and you don't know of it yet. Usually seen by it's suddenly too quiet. Why is it too quiet? Anyways, beyond that, also, I think it's been really well said that every parent has a choice. You are older than your kids. You are the adult. They are the kid. Whatever discomfort you feel, they're going to feel in some way, shape, or form, if not more. And they don't have your years of experience and not being ready, then getting through the things that you weren't ready for. Anything that you go through that is uncomfortable is likely going to be in some way, shape, or form a little worse for them if they're aware of it. And they're always aware of it because they're always listening, even when we don't think they are. So the more we can allow ourselves to be uncomfortable and get support when we can. It's okay to not be ready. You've done that before. This isn't new.
Awesomely worded. My next question is, what current issues are the three of you seeing that are currently impacting our LGBTQ plus youth?
We're going to be frank and honest. It's going to be safety. I mean, if we look over just the past 2 years, how many times have we seen a discussion that should have been logical, rational among people who call themselves legislators devolving into a fight, fist fights, and arguments? on either the federal level all the way down to the local level. And while these are grown adults, these are people that the youth are supposed to look up to and find that they themselves are arguing simply about their existence. So something, and I had brought this up before prior to this meeting starting, but my organization hosts an LGBTQ prom. Never in the history of the prom, with the person who's worked it prior to it coming to my organization and now, had she or I ever been inundated with so many questions about security about a prom. And that is from not just parents, but youth as well. So it's that much of a concern for them, their personal safety, going to an event where they're just wanting to be and live as their authentic selves. That's a huge concern. We as a society are not embracing them as much as we are saying, oh, be scared, be concerned, because you never know what's going to be around the corner and be after you, essentially. And who wants to live with that terror, knowing that that could exist in a moment that this is about pure excitement and joy of this is being around my friends with playing board games or dancing to music. But that's the world that we're living in now, where there's so many youth who feel insecure simply because of what they're seeing around them from local legislators, if not other people in society as well.
So I just want to piggyback off of that really quickly, Jordan, because a conversation that I often have with parents when they express fear about their child coming out is, it is not the other children that you need to worry about. It's the adults that are the problem. We are the ones that are impacting our children's safety. We are the ones causing concerns at school. And so in my brain, I like to play devil's advocate again. So I was thinking, if I'm a parent and I'm listening to you talk about safety, then am I being a good parent by not wanting my child to be their authentic selves to keep them safe? I know the answer, but I'm gonna go ahead and throw that out to you guys. Go ahead and take that one.
I mean, kind of combining both the last two questions together, that's harder to do than ever before. I mean, yes, kids are worried about safety because they are trying to be authentic and they are unfortunately dealing with hate crimes. But the reality is that the place where they weren't supposed to be safe in that regard, but were supposed to be safe, there have been more mass shootings than days of the year in this calendar year alone. There is not a kid on this country's ground that is not at least a little bit nervous that the fact that they have had to do more mass shooting drills than fire drills. Fire drills used to be what, once or twice a year? Mass shooting drills are now monthly. They're reminded of this on a very regular basis, and anytime they turn on any screen, if it didn't happen to them, it happened to someone else their age in a place where they may not be safe enough to come out. Previously, they didn't have to worry about being shot just for learning math. It's harder to keep them safe. We can't do it entirely unless some major things change.
Yeah, and I think it's really truly down to the uncertainty. You know, for these young people, they have not lived through what we as adults in different generations have lived through. They didn't live through the 2008 depression. They didn't live through 9/11. They didn't live through, Columbine or Virginia Tech being one of the first shootings they saw. This is everywhere and every day. They didn't see the fight through the 60s and the 80s and the early 2000s for LGBTQ rights. They didn't see the fights for marriage equality. They're seeing this with fresh eyes. And the last 2 years looks like a death sentence. And for those, especially in the trans community, they are watching 500 plus bills move through state houses, over 2/3 of them aimed at transgender youth or transgender adults. And so they see a future in which they are uncertain as to whether their very existence, we talk about living authentically, they don't know if their very existence will be criminalized in the near future. And it has been. It has been in states like Florida, in Texas, in Tennessee. 18 states have passed gender affirming care bans. And so for trans youth, they look at themselves, and I know this because I'm an adult and I have this. I look in the mirror and say, what would I be if someone forced me back into the closet, if someone took away my healthcare, my medicine, and I had to go back to living a life where I felt unauthentic, or worse, where I had to deal with seeing my body not match what it does now? It would be devastating. And it culminates in real in real consequences. And I saw a video just yesterday that, or maybe the day before, but it literally had me in tears. And it was a mom who had a trans youth who took their own life because they lived in one of these states and they didn't see a future. So the safety and the fear and the uncertainty are creating this perfect storm where children are taking these decisions. And it's, you know, I hear so many parents say, I think my kid is happy. I think they're okay. We always think that until it's too late. And then we hear all the time, we look back and said, oh, we missed this and this and this. It is getting worse. And if we want to pretend that our children are not absorbing this, then we're lying to ourselves. They are absorbing the national atmosphere. They are absorbing stuff that isn't even happening in their state, but they know that it is going to eventually come there. So.
This one other thing I wanted to share on this topic is it's about this one word, which is about being invalidated. That is something that tends to happen so often when it comes to members of the LGBTQ community. Now, I sit at the intersection of being a person of color, Black, and being gay. And sitting at that intersection, I already know, just purely based off something I had no control over yet again, which is simply my race, that my people, prior generations, were invalidated at one simple point because of something they had nothing to do with. It was literally circumstance. I'm born to this person, I'm born in this color. And that affected treatment and behaviors that they received. While we are trying to get to a better place of respect when it comes to those situations, the same thing is happening as it relates to the LGBTQ community. This feeling of invalidation that comes with every single bill that's passed that says that you are not a human being, you are something that we don't quite understand and must legislate, or have legislation that says that you are not allowed to be what you perceive yourself to be. An example I want to point out that came up before was there was a trans ban in the military. And I had questions that came to me and say, well, what type of deal would that be? What issue would that be for somebody who identifies as trans as a youth, or LGBTQ in general as a youth? And the story I paint is, imagine finding a way to feel comfortable with your authentic self in a way you never had, and that this is who you are, this is how you see yourself, and you want the world to see yourself in that same light. And add to that the fact that you want to go and serve your country, and your country says that you're not good enough because they've invalidated you through a policy that says your kind are not welcome here. Imagine if you just imagine for a moment what that can do to the mental state of somebody who has come to a great understanding of who they are and are able to expose that, and with that want to do nothing more than save their country, and being told, Stamp, you're invalidated simply because of who you are presenting as, who you say that you are. Imagine the tragedy that could come with that if you set yourself up, as so many individuals have for several generations, to say, I know I'm going to the military. I know that's what I'm working hard at. That's why I'm in ROTC. And you got that invalidation notice your freshman year, your sophomore year, junior year, your senior year. And that was all you were planning for, was going to the military. What are you left to do when you thought that was all you had, and something that you really wanted to do? And how noble is that you want to serve our country and protect our front lines, only to be told by the powers that be, essentially the higher position of legislation, that you're invalid as a person and unable to do that? That really plagues a person's psyche, which is why we see, again, so much anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation when it comes to our youth.
So as a parent, how do we have these age-appropriate conversations with our teens? Because everything you guys said, it is real, it is out there, this is part of their life. And I think so often as parents, we want to protect, and protect means not speaking truth. So what recommendations do you guys have about how to have honest conversations, but also age-appropriate with our teens or younger?
So I want to throw this out because I have a wonderful opportunity to meet Jazz Jennings this past weekend, who authored a book. It's a children's book for very young children. When I came out to my children, my son was 4. I bought him that book. I let him read it. He fell in love with it. He thought it was just so cool to see Jazz living as herself. And then I came out to him. So I always want to push back against the idea of age appropriate. Anything can be made age appropriate. If my 4-year-old can understand that their parent is not the gender that they were assigned at birth. I think that there's really no age limit to having these kinds of conversations. There are books at every reading level on every topic within the LGBTQIA plus community. There are people who work with every age level, and there's no restriction other than the one you put on yourself or your child that says they are too young to hear this. My kids are 8 and 10. I tell them all the time, I say, you are too young to identify as anything. They already tell me I'm pansexual or I'm bisexual because I already love everybody. And I love that that is their mindset. And I'll be there to guide them as they get older and explain those terms a little more in depth. But if elementary school kids, and that's the thing I always tell people, I hear the conversations, I hear the things that come home from the playgrounds about who's in love with who likes who, what they're all, they have crushes and they have boyfriends and girlfriends. And I'm like, y'all are 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, and y'all are too young for all of this. They're already having these conversations. And if they can have these conversations, then we can help them have these more complicated or these more nuanced conversations that people exist. And I always want to push back and push back and push back because I live at my kids' school and their friends see me and I'm gender fluid. So some days I appear male, some days I appear female. I go in and have lunch with my kids. Their friends know me now. They ask like one time, what are you, a boy or a girl? And I'm like, I'm both. I'm neither. I'm all of the above and sometimes at the same time. They're like, cool. And a lot of times I'll say, I just don't need to explain it to you. I just look how I look. There's no limit other than the one we're putting on it.
I love that point because it's really important to consider what kids have access to these days. I remember before the internet, when things were still in, paper media, kids still were exposed to pornography as early as 12. How many kids have cell phones now? How many schools don't really have the best cyber nanny software or whatever else? There's tons of documentation that a lot of kids actually end up on porn sites during their school day because they clicked on the wrong link by accident doing a harmless YouTube or Google search. So it really is the fact that all of this can be made appropriate for the right age. There is no wrong age here. They're probably accessing stuff far worse than what these terms are anyways. And if we don't at least start with these basics of what does LGBTQIA mean? What things have you heard about from school or from your friends? A great way to start these topics are by asking them what they're already seeing, what they're already exposed to, what they already know. They may surprise you. They may say, oh, I've read all these things and I've heard all these things and everyone told me all these things. They may know more than you do, honestly. Genuinely, the world of the internet, be prepared for that. That is a possibility. And it really does come down to if heterosexuality is age appropriate for Disney and younger, why isn't everything else? Kids start learning this stuff and talking about their boyfriend or their girlfriend as early as 3 and 4 because all the movies involve heterosexual relationships. We don't seem to have issues there. We can talk about those. Why can't we talk about that with 2 men or 2 women or 2 trans people or whatever else? It's the same thing. The only difference is the social stigma we attach to it. And kids see things completely more naive than we do. I think it's there's an organization I follow probably on Instagram that does sex education for parents, basically. And they talk about how kids will do things that are entirely not sexual. They are ticklish, they are silly, they are literally just touching that part of the body because it's right there and they don't know what they're doing. Parents will see that and freak out going, oh my God, you can't do that. It wasn't sexual to them. We add that context. The same applies to all these other terms. And the more we talk about them with real, natural, pre-existing terminology, instead of a lot of slang, instead of parental preference, it becomes even easier to talk about. So the sooner we talk about these things as they are, the easier they get. And the easiest way is usually by being curious and asking your kid what they know.
One thing I want to mention, and it's what I call saying the quiet out loud. When you're in this position, it's so important that you examine your internal bias. If not, what you're spouting or espousing, without examination, you don't have the clarification, the clarity of mind to realize all you're saying is what somebody else told you without doing any proper research on your end. It just becomes, I'm espousing what I saw this minority group say. Well, how many minority groups actually said that? Have you seen what the opposition actually said? So when it comes to something as simple as the topic of, well, is this something that's age appropriate? Why wouldn't it be age appropriate? If you just did an examination of what you had access to and then brought that into the 21st century where we had internet, do you think it would be any different? Do you think it'd be the same? Going back to the topic of what level of access is. Most children, especially in the Northern Virginia area, don't have books, they have school issued laptops. If you let that sink in for a minute, there's control in having a book with pre-printed material that you're handed to somebody and know exactly what's in it from page 1 to 1000. When you hand over a laptop and saying this is actually your greatest source of information, and to the point, yet again, Northern Virginia is not really putting many books in students' hands. They're putting these laptops. What do they have access to? So if you're examining your internal bias and also examining what your children have access to, you get to this point where you start questioning and really hopefully realizing my children have access to all this information. Let me be the conduit that helps them understand it in the way that makes the most sense.
Chris had to leave early, so apologize for that. I did also want to put out there, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put that in the chat, or you can send them directly to Val and Val will read them out to us. Wanted to pause there because I always forget to say that part. But I wanted to sort of piggyback on this idea of validating and being honest, because I think that that's so heavy that I just want us to say that piece again, because I think there's just so much when we talk about how our LGBTQ plus youth are at risk of anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation and suicidal behaviors. It really is that idea of not feeling validated. It's the skirting around things rather than hitting it directly. So, and I think that's so important that even with the pandemic, I saw as a therapist such a high rise in just fear with LGBTQ youth at home, because as much as we want to create that safety at home, sometimes we're not. And so I think, again, I don't want to beat up on parents, but doing the work yourself. I love the example that Jordan used about having a diagnosis of any sort. If your child had a medical diagnosis, you would research that. You would be involved. It would be scary, but you would do the work. And I, as a person with a medical issue, I cannot tell you how important that analogy was when Jordan just said that, because I think this is really a part of it's the family. I've known Jordan for a while, let me say that. So Jordan, I really want you to talk about the coming out versus letting in process, because I think that's also an important piece for parents to hear.
So we've been indoctrinated as a society to think about the coming out process as using myself as an example, somebody who identifies as gay, letting you know what my sexual orientation is. Now, if we just think about it from a practicality standpoint of when was the last time you met a heterosexual person who felt the need to let you know that they were heterosexual outside of an LGBTQ establishment, my guess is that you'd probably say very little. But again, there comes this expectation with, oh, well, if you're a member of the community, I have somewhat of an expectation that you're going to come out to me. And it's not necessarily so, and not the way I believe in my heart of hearts things should go. Now, everybody is absolutely different, but the terminology that I subscribe to is letting you in. There is coming to my own understanding and living in my truth. That takes time and is generally a process for us as individuals. Once I get to that truth, my goal as an individual is not to mass spread it. Yes, we have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, the list goes on. So am I to say, okay, let me put a message together that transcends all those social media platforms, includes everybody in? Or do I say, I let in those into my world that I feel most comfortable with, and everybody else, it really doesn't matter whether you know or don't know or speculate or not, because this is what ultimately is considered my personal business. We all have our own personal business, and not just related to our sexual orientation, but issues that are going on in our family, things that are going on at work. Those are all situations that are ours to contend with and share with those as we feel comfortable. Sexual orientation shouldn't be any different. So instead of asking the question, which I generally promote, or I'm sorry, I disdain generally the question, being very honest and frank here about when did you come out? I'm not a huge fan of that because there's just so many expectations that come along with that. If anything, it's let a person in their own mind, in their own time, in their own way, tell you if they feel comfortable with you. And if they don't, also be very clear, don't take offense to that because you don't know where that person is in their journey. You don't know whether they've truly come to a point of this is who I am authentically and I understand that, or I'm still questioning. So letting you in is a way to say, I let those who are important or special or care about in, but there is no expectation that from my point of view that I should let this be known on a mass level. So that when I walk into a room or a restaurant or any other type of place that I'm saying I'm this gay Black guy, this is what you need to know about me.
So Fox, I don't know if you've heard that before, but I really like that. And I really think, hi, Chris. I also think it's important just to know I've had a lot of conversations with parents that feel hurt if they are not the first ones or very early on the list. And I just think it's very important to know that this process and part of being an ally, and my definition, is also not making someone else's process about you. Because it's not. But I think we as humans, unfortunately, tend to do that far too often. Chris, I do know that you have to leave soon. So if you have any parting words for us before you have to head out, we'd love to hear them.
I guess if anything, I would just like to say there are a ton of resources available. There are so many groups. It did not exist like this. I told somebody the other day here in Loudon, we just held our second annual Loudon Pride Festival, and we had over 135 businesses participate in only the second year. And when I was having that discussion with somebody who was with the county, I said, this was unimaginable 5 years ago. The resources did not exist. The support from the community did not exist. The infrastructure did not exist at the national support events in places that are purple. Solidly purple. And so from a nonpartisan, and especially with our children. And so at the end of the day, what we really have to do is learn to adapt, learn to find
I feel like Chris is saying awesome things and we're missing
learn
it.
to communicate better. So I'm sorry if none of that came through.
No, a good part of it did. Definitely. Thank you, Chris. I think you added a fantastic point of view to this conversation. So we do have one question in the chat that I want to read out for everyone. So what would you say to a parent who wants to be supportive, but there is also another parent who is not, and they are trying to convince that other parent to be more supportive?
Be curious. If someone is already defensive in how they're, in whether or not they're engaging with the topic, they're not going to want to be convinced in the first place. So trying to go at that head on is only going to bring up that defensiveness before they even hear anything that might be said. Chances are they might not hear anything that was said because they feel like they're trying to be convinced. They're not wanting to be convinced, but they know the other person's trying to convince. So be curious, ask questions. It's a much easier thing to bring up a topic and try and get them to point out the exact thing you want them to say, the exact same thing you'd be trying to tell them to actually hear and understand and value. If they're a parent who's really able to care and see past their own bias, they might be able to do that. If they're not able to see past their own bias, well, be curious about that too. You two share a kid together.
Just going to something I said earlier is about understanding that there's a process involved with this. So with the parent who is supportive, it's what did you find out and you just said, hey, I'm in this great place, I'm ready to be supportive, or was it a process for you? And even if it was, understanding where your partner is, I'm hoping that there's conversations being had that says, well, this is where I'm at. Where are you today? Is this a place you want to be? Well, how can we get you there? Those are all the appropriate conversations, questions, points that you want to hit. The concern becomes when you are that person who is in a relationship with another individual who's saying, I don't know if I want to. That requires some different type of questions and unfortunately some hard conversations. If you're dealing with a partner that you may absolutely love, but knowing that they are not in a place to want to move forward, it becomes, well, once you know that, what are you going to do with that? You being the other parent in the household, knowing that there's an LGBTQ youth who needs that support. So, but again, the underlying message here just being mindful about the process and checking in and see what your partner is and kind of understanding from there what the steps forward should be. Are they just further back in the process? They need more assistance and maybe get to where I am, sorry, where I am. Are they unwilling? If they're unwilling, is that something I'm okay with and willing to let ride? Or is that going to be a hard discussion of we may be on separate pages, which may be problematic for us as a couple? So.
That was great. So I say this is going to be my last question, but one of you are going to say something and it's going to make me ask some other difficult question. But what if I'm the parent, I'm watching this, and I just have not done any of the things you guys have recommended? I've been doing this wrong. I've misgendered my child. I haven't been accepting. What do I do now?
I generally like to explain to parents that the fact that you're asking the questions and you're seeking out assistance is the first huge step. There are mistakes. We're human. We make all types of mistakes all day, every day. That's a part of life. That's part of the fabric of our life as human beings. The question is, do we stay stuck in those mistakes or do we try to learn from them and do better? What I've learned, seen, experienced, especially when it comes to those who are identified as transgender, I didn't come into the situation always getting every single situation right when it comes to gender, when it comes to name, especially if I've known a person before they transition. But there's a willingness to learn. I ask questions and I move from there. And if there's any offense ever taken, which I'm grateful it hasn't at this point, but I make sure that person's okay. I check in with them. If I felt like there was any shift that I saw or physically or emotionally even possibly felt that I could have contributed to, I just check in with that person and say, hey, did I say anything? If not, we just move on from there. So that's the important part, is remembering that you've come this far and gotten to a point that you're asking questions, which is a huge step. You look at our society right now, it's a real big winner for me. And then from there, it's allowing yourself to make mistakes as you learn. As long as you're open to learning, I think you're in the best place possible to truly support your child and help them through this phase of life that they're in.
Yeah, that was perfect. I have nothing else to say. No. Give yourself credit. You're having this thought of, okay, I haven't done this. I don't know if I want to do this. This doesn't feel good. The fact, as Jordan said, the fact that you're thinking about it. A comment I like to make a lot of time is that an easy way to tell whether or not a parent cares is how much they worry, how much they nag, how much they stay up late at night, because that's caring. If you don't care about those things, you won't act on those things. And that's your choice. And also always remember, you're not alone in this. There are millions, probably billions of other parents going through the exact same thing. And if you don't want to hear from them, there are numerous professionals, especially in the Northern Virginia area, but really thanks to both COVID making things a little more aware, unfortunately, and also just pre-existing technology, the internet is a wonderful thing. There are so many people who can help any parent at any stage through this, whether it's an educator, a coach, a therapist, or even a school teacher. So you are not alone. The question is, where do you want to start?
I also like reassuring parents that no one expects you to do this perfectly. You don't do any other part of parenting perfectly, and we don't expect you to do this part perfectly. But taking that ownership and saying, I know for me, but similar to what Jordan was saying, if I've known someone and I've I knew them as a different gender and having to adjust to a different name or a different gender, there definitely is sometimes a learning curve. You own it. I apologize. I'm sorry. Like, I'm working on it, because no one expects you to do this correctly. We just expect you to make the effort. And that acknowledgement of, eek, maybe I wasn't doing this so great, is huge. It's huge, and it goes a really, really long way. I would also say to any parent, if you're questioning yourself, you're already on this road to changing behavior. It's if you're listening to this and then you don't want to do anything, that's a little bit more concerning. So one final question, then I'm going to have you guys give your final words. But how do I help my teen to be an ally to their friends?
Model it. Even if your kids aren't liking you, even if you are currently not cool, even if they are frustrated with whatever you are asking them to do, if you are not modeling the behavior you want from them, they're not going to do it. So yeah, you can tell them over and over and over again, you should be an ally. Here are all the ways to be an ally. Did you read that thing about being an ally? But if you are not actively showing up for other people as an ally, if they're not seeing you do that, simple things, even like right here on this call, my pronouns are listed as my name. That's a very small thing. You don't even need to start wearing a name tag with your own pronouns. You could literally just mention pronouns. See what happens. Model it. They're going to follow that more than anything you're going to try and convince them to do.
Yeah, I think modeling is the best way to go. In addition to just showing them, it's also talking about it too, right? So it's not just talking about them, and it's walking the walk and talking the talk. That's very simply what it is, right? So I know what allyship is, and or support, because I was just use support. Allyship has, for a lot of people, it just has so many meanings that it becomes too big for them in their minds to understand. So I will just simply call it support and say, how do you support people? What are you doing to support people, better support people? What are some areas where you feel like I didn't have the knowledge, but I've worked to gain it? And share that, just as you share everything else in terms of learning opportunities and objectives for your children, share that with them. Share them how you went from this space of not really knowing much. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about the LGBTQ community. It could be, I went to school to be a teacher and I worked in IT. Well, that's a huge difference. Well, how'd you do that? This is how I did that. I learned. I sought out so I could properly do this job. So while that's a bit more abstract, it still hits on that point of, hey, there was this transition of I was here and I'd get there, and there was this in between. And explaining and modeling that in between, I think, is so important. So
I love that. Val is going to put a survey in the group chat for us, which is super important. It helps us with our grants and everything else at the foundation. So if you could take a few minutes to fill that out, that would be great. Jordan, any last words for our viewers today?
I love that these types of conversations are being had. They're so crucial to our society. They help to counteract what is the noise that we're seeing so often out there in the mainstream as it relates to the LGBTQ community, what we're trying to do or not trying to do as it changes moment by moment, millisecond by millisecond, it seems. But I just want to say how grateful I'm that the Ryan Bartel Foundation sees this as important and wants to make sure the appropriate people are here so we can have discussions, so we can increase what our support structure looks like for parents who are children who recently come out to them, increase that allyship that we also talk about as well. So outside of that, I'm happy to be here and always speak. I love what we're talking about and furthering those discussions as best I can. So I'm just happy to be here, just again, to be a part of this conversation.
And we're always happy to have you, Jordan. So thank you. Fox?
Yeah, no, really, it means a lot that the Ryan Bartel Foundation is actually doing this, not only just during Pride, but paying attention to it and having these conversations. It's also important to remember that, I mentioned parent support groups before, and the Ryan Bartel Foundation has a monthly parent support group, unless I am mistaken. So it might be a thing to look into. In terms of being an ally as a parent, teens are going to be teens. Whether or not something is or isn't a phase depends heavily on whether or not you say it is a phase. More often than not, if you treat them like adults, give them respect when they are able to, be appropriate with it, they'll talk with you. You'll have a better relationship with them. They'll be safer. You'll be an ally. It doesn't start without those conversations, though.
Well, thank you both. Thank Chris, who is no longer here, but I think this was such an informative conversation. I really love the information that you guys shared and just normalizing this process. I think allyship being a verb and the letting in versus coming out are going to be key things that people really take away from this conversation. And I just love that we're normalizing having these conversations. It's okay to put it out there. It's okay to talk about, it's okay to investigate and to educate yourself. And I think as long as we continue to be curious about what's happening with our teens, be supportive and willing to learn and grow and step out of our own stuff, I think that we hopefully will make this world a better place, one person and one step at a time. So I'm going to turn things back over to Val. Again, thank you all.
Thank you, Denisha. Yeah, this is, another key aspect of everything that we've been talking about is something that the foundation, it's a pillar of what we stand for, and that's acceptance. Just acceptance. No period at the end, no capital A at the beginning. It's just, kind of transcends. And I think that that's really important. And something that we try to create that within all of our programs. So thank you all, Fox, Jordan, Denisha, thank you so much for kind of facilitating this great conversation. And we will see you in July when we come back and talk about healthy relationships. I think that's really important, regardless of, whether a teen is LGBTQ plus or not. Healthy relationships are really important, and not just in, the romantic sense, but just in the friend groups that they surround themselves with. So, what are those healthy relationships and how can we foster that for our teens? So thank you so much. And we will see you all in July.
Good night.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.